Welcome to episode 97 of The Route presented by White Whale Marketing. The Route is a glorified sports business coffee chat. As a new guest every episode as they share their route and experiences in sports. I'm Christopher Nascimento, and as always, there's just a few things to get into before we begin. First off, if you haven't already, follow us on social media at The Route Sports. If you're listening to this, maybe you want to get a head start in your network, or maybe you're trying to connect with more people. So if you're watching on video, you can see in this corner here at The Route Sports. Check us out there. We're on all major platforms. Additionally, if you're listening to this as well, please take the time to subscribe, follow, rate 5 stars, like, plus, whatever. It's all good stuff. Or even just leave a nice comment on YouTube. And yeah, if you haven't done any of those things yet, take the time to do so. And before we get into our episode, we just have a ad read to get into. So if you're like me, you like to put a couple bucks while watching some sports, don't make the same mistake as I have. So I'll be watching, let's say a hockey game, right? Especially with it just ending here in June when we're recording this. And I'll be live betting. I'll put, a couple dollars on the game, try to see if I can make some money back. And then as soon as I place the bet and it's in play, I will be watching intermission, or I'll have a buddy tell me that they just placed the exact same bet and they got it for a better, odds than I did. So the solution to that, and the way to get a leg up in sports betting, is to use something like BetStamp to compare the best available odds among sports books. So the only way you're going to get an edge in online sports betting is by having an account with multiple sports books. So download the BetStamp app or go to betstamp.app/Ontario and use the code WHALE so you can get access to their affiliates and their prices. BetStamp allows you to verify the existence of a proposed bet with their corresponding odds. This provides you to buy and sell picks with full transparency. Users selling sports picks on BetStamp do not sacrifice any royalty or cut to the app. It's completely free. So again, if you want an edge in sports betting, use BetStamp by downloading their app or visiting betstamp.app/Ontario and using the code WHALE to get access to all of their affiliates and pricing. With that now done, we can kind of get into our episode. So I'd now like to introduce someone who is deep into the digital sports media space, delivering highly engaged audiences of sports fans to advertisers, head of North American partnerships at Playmaker Capital, Adam Seaborn. Welcome to The Route. How's it going?
Good. How are you, Chris?
Not too bad. Adam and I are just talking about our candidate plans. Looks like we're heading to the same direction here, but that's not what we're here for today. Let's kind of get into it. As the podcast says, The Route. So do you mind maybe taking us through your route? So where did it begin? Where did you go to school? And how did we get to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, today I'm the head of partnerships for Playmaker Capital, based here in Toronto. I went to school at Queen's University. I went to Queen's for film and media studies, not exactly knowing what I wanted in terms of a career. I think going to film and media school, I assumed to be something around, the creative arts, maybe something in film production or television production. But it always been a really diehard sports fan. And in the back of my mind, I always thought that if there's a way that I could intersect my love of sports and my love of kind of media and advertising, that would be excellent for me. Truthfully, I also thought there was a chance I could go do an MBA or go to law school or do something more professional as well. At Queen's, the film and media program there is split in kind of two streams. There's a certain level of production where you're actually getting cameras in your hands and getting Final Cut Pro and doing editing work. But it's not just a traditional film school like that. It's also theoretic classes. And in my fourth year, I took a course around the media and film business. And being close to Toronto, we actually had the ability to have some exposure to people working in the industry in Toronto. And that's when I realized that there's a whole kind of career around media, and specifically sports media, outside of what you might think of in terms of like being a sports agent or working for a team. There's this whole world around whether it's sports broadcast, whether it's sports management, whether it's sports advertising, and that's when I started stick my teeth into it.
Yeah, no, for sure, that makes sense. And was that kind of like the first like aha moment, let's say, where like, oh wow, like I never realized this? Because I know when I was a kid, being an athlete was kind of the first thing. Then maybe a sports agent, and when that kind of really kind of came to light is when my dad's like, oh, maybe you should watch Jerry Maguire, right? To kind of see, like,
Yeah, yeah,
what
absolutely. Yeah, I would have loved to have played left wing for the Toronto Maple Leafs when I was a kid, but unfortunately, that wasn't going to happen. So, no, I mean, I did an internship with Bell Media. Luckily, through Queens, I was able to get an internship with Bell. It was unpaid, but they gave me class credit for it, which was amazing. This was in the early 2010s, and I mean, the coolest part for me is I had a key card. I got to go down to the office on Queen Street every day at 299 Queen at the CTV offices and had access to all sorts of things. They didn't really have that much for me to do as the intern there. I was working not in sports. I was working in the comedy and factual development department. But I would, essentially sit in on meetings, listen to pitch calls, do whatever busy work. I reorganized, a few thousand DVDs over the course of a couple of days. But I get copied on a lot of emails and get to have some exposure to see, that summer was a World Cup summer, I believe. And I remember getting emails from the PR and research department at CTV about what the ratings were for the World Cup and, how important an event that was for the network. That was a bit of an aha moment, that internship. I made a lot of really great connections with people. And squarely was like, wow, it'd be really cool to go back and work there. When I graduated from Queens, I wanted to work at Bell. I called all the contacts that I had there and couldn't get a job. Essentially, they're like, hey, listen, there's not hiring, and this has been a common refrain in sports media and all media across North America for the last 10 years is that there's been less and less jobs for whether it's young grads, whether it's for people who've been working in the industry for their whole career. It's been a shrinking ecosystem. So, you're kind of forced to do it yourself and figure out where you can find opportunity. I found opportunity being a PA, so a production assistant on set with Epitome Pictures, which is a production house in Toronto. They produced Degrassi famously and a bunch of other children's shows as well. They were actually acquired by DHX Media, who are now WildBrain. So a lot of name changes over the last 10 years as consolidation happens in media. But anyways, at the time it was DHX Media. I worked there as a PA, again, got really great experience on set and working kind of hand in hand with, directors and the gaffing department and lighting department and seeing, what goes in actually producing television content. There's film content. There was online only content that they produced. And that whole time knowing that I would love to get back to the broadcaster, get back to Bell Media and get my hands on that advertising side of things. So after working at DHX and spending that whole time trying to find a job, I was able to interview and get a job back with Bell Media in the national radio sales department. And from there, I've been kind of staying in advertising and partnerships and really narrowing in on sports the whole time.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I guess kind of the kind of question for it, especially like maybe the people listening, talking about, hey, like, you finish school, you're like, hey, I'd love to get back in with Bell. And then, boom, you hit a wall, you can't get back in, right? Yeah. So do you mind maybe touching on, hey, like, how did you get that PA position? And then even more so as well, how did you get back in with Bell after? Was it through like connections at the PA job? Was it old connections? And like, how did that transpire?
Yeah, so I'll take you back to, so I did the internship at Bell between my third and fourth year at Queens. And in fourth year at Queens, I took this kind of business, I don't remember what the name of the course was, but, media and television business or something like that gave us a bunch of exposure. Essentially every class was a guest lecturer or a guest from someone who's working in the business. So we had people from ad agencies, we had people from studios, and the professor of that class very intelligently encouraged everyone to make as many connections as you can. So literally, we're going to give you the email and the phone number of the people who guest lecture for here, and feel free to email them and try to make a connection with them. One of our final assignments for that course was to do a profile on someone who's working in an industry that you wanted to. I was able to get in touch with someone at Sportsnet, literally just through cold calling them. I did a project with them. I interviewed that person. And that was kind of my first taste of, okay, you really got to hustle to find your own opportunities there. So again, I did the internship at Bell. Everyone, left saying, oh, it was great to have you here. We'd love if you worked here full time. Come back. Oh, there's no job for you when you graduate. So to get that job with DHX, I mean, it was Epitome at the time. I didn't know who that was. The Ontario government, I think they still do this. You can find a list of every film and television production that is being shot in the province of Ontario right now. I think you can do it in every province of the country, actually. And that's because, there's all these tax benefits that go into these productions that come in here. And anyways, it's all public record. You can see where they're shooting, what they're shooting, who the production manager is. Sometimes they'll have a list of some of the key cast, key producers, director, but most of them have a contact email and info. So I found these lists and I literally cold emailed and cold called every single person on the list and said, hey, I'm a recent film and media grad from Queen's University. I'd love to work as a PA on your set. And the only reason I knew what a PA was is because someone had told me that when I was in that fourth year class, is that's like a good entry level role. I literally said in the email, I don't have any experience, but I've gone to film school. I'm really interested in X, Y, and Z. To be honest, whatever the production was, I would just say I'm really interested in something that fits into that genre. I'd like scour out whatever information I can. Say I love like horror movies. I see you're a student of horror movie, or I love like comedy to see it's a comedy or whatever it is. And eventually, a couple people got back to me and said, "Okay, actually, yeah, we need a PA on set, or we need an office PA." And I did a couple interviews and was lucky enough to get a job. That job was really important because that was like kind of my first legit credential in that was really the film and movie business as opposed to sports media, but it's tangential enough that it gave me exposure. Also, as you're getting older at a university, you're getting some experience just in life in general on how to present yourself. You're no longer someone who just graduated. So that was really important for me to kind of understand, okay, you got to hustle a little bit to find that first gig.
Yeah, no, that for sure makes sense. And it's kind of interesting just how you're saying, right? Where, I think it's a lot of, especially with like COVID, right? A lot of those jobs within sports or even let's say, media or film, they kind of all kind of went away for let's say a period of time here, right? They're starting to come back, and now people are either a lot of people listening are kind of that mid-20, late-20 range. So maybe they're trying to hop back into it, or maybe they're trying to, move up within the position. So I feel like what you're saying now is pretty interesting. But then so let's go at it from the perspective you're saying, you have this PA job and now you're trying to get into sports, right? What did you kind of do in that interview, or how did that transpire to land back in sports? Because obviously it's a competitive industry to get into.
Yeah, I mean, listen, sports marketing, sports in general as like a sports business is really competitive because, sports are ubiquitous. Like a lot of people are sports fans. Same way a lot of people want to work in movies, right? Like you go to LA, people want to be actors, people want to be in music. People want to work in sports. So it's really competitive jobs. And you're going to get a lot of people that are willing to probably work for less than they are worth if it was another industry. They're also willing to work at like, roles that are maybe a little bit beneath their experience because they love a team or they just think it's going to be cool to work on. So, I mean, the first thing I realized is like that PA job that I took, I didn't care to work on the set of Degrassi, right? Like that was not my main interest. I would have loved to be working on, for the Toronto Maple Leafs or the Raptors, or working, for an NFL team or something in the US. But I was like, this is someone who's going to let me in the door and give me an opportunity. And the same was true as I kind of pivoted back into media and sports media. The first job that I got with Bell Media was not in sports. It was in the national radio department. But I knew that Bell Media owned TSN, and I knew that I'd have some exposure to TSN. And CTV also carries a lot of really big sport events, the NFL, it carries, World Cup, things like that. So I was like, okay, I'm going to have some exposure to sports. And then once I got in at Bell Media, I made it very clear to everyone that I worked with, like, hey, I'm really interested in sports. I think I know a lot about it. So if there's ever opportunities to work on projects or work on sales or sponsorship deals around our sports assets, I would like to be included. And I think being really clear with people like, hey, I love TSN, so I'm going to be the person in the national radio sales group who knows everything about TSN radio. So so one of the senior reps is working on a pitch for TSN radio and they need help from one of the junior coordinators, which I was, they're going to ask me because they know that I'm really passionate about sports. And when there's an opportunity to do a sponsorship deal for the World Cup, like I'm going to be there. Or there's like, even like a social event that's happening around sports, they knew that I was going to be there. So not being picky about what that first opportunity was, I think was important for me to get a little experience and also learn that it was actually something I was interested in. I think a lot of younger people are maybe they're, in school for sports and media management and they want to, they think that they're going to love working in sports. It's not quite as glamorous as you might imagine it to be. And in some ways, some people probably realize that it's not for them and maybe just a broader marketing scope is going to be more of their interest.
Yeah, no, I for sure agree with that, right? Where I think one of the biggest things I feel like people say when they come on this podcast is a lot of times when they speak to, let's say, students that are about to leave and trying to get a career in sports, is a lot of times they get, blinded by the lights, right? They're, oh, hey, like I'm a Maple Leafs fan, let's say, right? And they're like, oh, I just want to, I'll do anything. I'll just want to work for the Leafs. But at the same time, you're not playing for the Leafs. You're not being a fan of the Leafs, right? You're working for the business, right? So it's a business thing where you can't get blinded by that, and you still got to provide some type of value. And then on the point where you're saying, you basically got your foot in the door, right? From what you're saying, you got into Bell Media because they knew, the capabilities they had with them. But then from there, you kind of made your intentions known. And I think that's kind of a great way for, people within sports to kind of move forward. Because, I even I worked with someone where they told me that, they got in with an organization. They had various sports teams, and he just made it clear, hey, soccer, soccer, I'm the soccer guy. And then eventually Ottawa got a soccer team. And then when he moved on and he was at a different team, when his connections were speaking to people, they're like, hey, like this is the soccer guy, like this is our soccer guy. And he ended up like years later, being a director for the soccer team, right? So it kind of like starts putting things out there so you can kind of get the ball rolling. But it makes a lot of sense. Is that something that you would recommend all the time, right? For being people to get in the door and then work from there, right? Because sometimes it's maybe you get into ticketing with a sports team, or like you're saying, get into any job with Bell and maybe try to wiggle your way to TSN.
Yeah.
That's something you recommend, or is it dependent on what it is?
I think that that's not a bad strategy. I also think that people, assume that they need to be working for one of the, handful of large media or sports organizations that exist in the country, if it's in Canada or in the US, where there's going to be lots of opportunity, maybe no money, but opportunity with minor league and kind of tier 2, tier 3 sports. And that's going to give you a lot of exposure to a lot of the same kind of challenges and skill set you're going to need at the professional level. So, I mean, a lot of other people come this, and this is a common angle that people from sports marketing come at, is they, start by volunteering or working on an honorarium basis for a minor league team, for a university team, for an NCAA team, before they make their way into the professional life. Meanwhile, they're working, a full-time job elsewhere that maybe isn't exactly in sports. So I think that that's also an opportunity. And the other thing that I would have recommended, this is something I thought about, is looking at the brands that activate around sports a lot. So think about consumer packaged goods brands or automakers or banks or financial institutions. A lot of them spend a lot of money marketing around sports, and there's always an opportunity to get into the marketing departments with those brands and kind of get exposure to sports marketing from a brand perspective if you really think that's important to you.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And it's definitely something where, I know when I was in school, and I think I was talking about this earlier, the beautiful thing about the podcast, you're hearing all the different ways to kind of get into sports, right? Where maybe initially when you're younger, like, the only way I'm going to, work for sports, if I'm in Toronto, it's going to be the Maple Leafs, the Raptors, X, Y, Z, right? But then as you're saying, there's all these different elements to it where, the Maple Leafs depend on all these different other stakeholders too. So no, it makes a lot of sense. And then do you mind maybe building off of what you're saying? So you got into Bell, you made your intentions known. Hey, like I'm the junior coordinator, but I love TSN. And how did that transpire where you started getting that experience within sports and, continuing it on from there?
Yeah, so I mean, pretty quickly at TSN, I was in the national radio group. There's an opportunity, there's reorganization happening that I can move to this kind of multi-platform sales group that was working with media agencies on ad sales, right? So sponsorship and ad sales within Bell Media's suite of families, but no longer was I just working on national radio. I was working on every asset that we had across television, radio, print, digital, podcast, everything that there was there. And that allowed me to narrow in really on the sports assets that we had. And within my group, I became kind of the expert on all our sports things, as well as a lot of our audio products and podcast and radio products, but really tried to, focus in on sports. That gave me exposure to ad agencies and brands that were trying to activate around sports. So now you're making relationships with people in the industry. You're also making relationships internally at Bell with the people who actually produce these sports assets, because, the sales department is working in conjunction with them. So now it doesn't take long before you've worked on an RFP or you've worked on an execution for a big brand. I remember, having an opportunity in that first year at Bell to sell ad time in the Super Bowl. And now you can just say, okay, I've worked on a brand's, ad sales for the Super Bowl, Super Bowl in Canada, but it's still the largest television event that happens annually in Canada. And that's something that you just have now as an experience, and you get exposure to how brands think about that, how the broadcaster thinks about that, how the leagues think about that, et cetera. I stayed at Bell for a while and then was given an opportunity to work at an ad agency, Kingstar Media, who are very much on the opposite side of the relationship. So at Bell and TSN, we were selling media to agencies. I was buying media at the agency on behalf of brands, and that makes you all of a sudden have exposure to everyone else. So when I was inside the Bell ecosystem, I was an expert on all the Bell assets, but didn't have exposure to what goes on with the rest of the media, companies in Canada. You go to an ad agency where, a brand is giving you the responsibility of their budget to go execute and go buy media on their behalf, where you're going to have to know the pricing and you're going to have to know the contacts and the value proposition of every media company in the country. So you get exposure to Rogers and Sportsnet and Chorus and Quebecor and TVA and all the print assets, and the Globe and Mail and National Post and Post Media and all the radio groups. So quickly you have now gone from, having exposure to a bunch of different brands, but working really on the Bell Media assets, to exposure to, a smaller amount of brands because you're an agency with only a handful of clients, but every single media company in the country.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And, before we kind of get into that further in that position, you kind of glossed over something pretty big, right? Working on a Super Bowl commercial. What was that like? Because, you're kind of saying, you started off as a PA and then finally being able to kind of dive all the way into sports. What was that like? What kind of things were you working on then?
Yeah, so I mean that first, it's funny. Like when I was at Bell, there was a lot of that back and forth going on with this. This is a little insider, but like that simultaneous substitution ruling from the CRTC that eventually went to the Supreme Court and was reversed. But when I was at Bell, you get exposure to what is important to the network and how the network thinks about sports, and the way that they think about it is quite different than the way that a fan might think about it or the way that a brand might think about it. So, for example, I mean, we used to joke at Bell quite openly that no one working for Bell or TSN was allowed to be a Blue Jays fan, even though a lot of people working at TSN are huge Blue Jays fans. But every time the Blue Jays do well, it's bad for everyone's pockets, right? Those are ad dollars that go to Rogers, the main competitor, and don't go to TSN. So we openly would, kind of jokingly, but root against the Blue Jays doing well. And we'd also, when the hockey rights moved and Rogers signed that huge, $5.2 billion deal. Well, all of a sudden, we only really care about the regional NHL hockey that happens, with the Jets or with the Flames, or actually not with the Flames, but with the Jets, the Leafs, and the Senators. And we would root against Hockey Night in Canada doing well, right? Like you don't want Hockey Night in Canada to do well. Now, one of the key assets that existed within, TSN's family was the CFL and the NFL. So football was really core to the strategy. When we would go out and pitch opportunities to leverage Bell's assets and CTV's assets. Football was a huge part of it, both the CFL and the NFL. And obviously the Super Bowl being kind of like the crown jewel of that. It's the largest audience on television annually. The main way that Bell Media drives ad revenue is through television. Television made up the most of their ad revenue, right? So when you're focused on ad sales, where's the most ad revenue coming in? Well, like the highest density of ad revenue for the whole year is around the Super Bowl. And there's a lot of focus at the company around how do we sell Super Bowl spots? What's the most we can sell them to? Where the brands we're going to have? How do we cover exclusivities for certain categories and really make the most money? So when you realize from the top down, from the senior leadership there, that this is an important asset for them, as kind of a junior person who's a coordinator first and then working as a sales representative, you put a lot of your time focused. Okay, well, how am I going to go out and make sure we sell the Super Bowl with someone? And I was just very lucky in that I had started kind of moved from that coordinator role to more of a sales role in that year, right around the time the Super Bowl was, and there was unsold inventory in the Super Bowl. I was able to leverage some brands that I was working with and kind of convince them, hey, this is a really great audience opportunity. It was actually brands coming from the U.S. who were unaware of kind of what the spill was like from the U.S. into the Canadian market with the Super Bowl. They were already activating heavily in the Super Bowl in the U.S. We were able to convince them to spend a few other 100,000 more in the Canadian market to activate in the Super Bowl. So, that was really, quite exciting and an opportunity to feel like you're bringing a lot of value. Like, bringing in a net new advertiser to the Super Bowl was important. And even if, from a revenue perspective, it was small and didn't make a huge difference to the bottom line of Bell Media's ad group, you got kind of praise from the internal group, said, okay, that's good. Like we sold another one of these really valuable airtime. So that again was great exposure and a good opportunity for me to grow.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's pretty interesting, right? Because a lot of people, like you're saying, it's like one of the biggest events of the year, and a lot of people pay attention to it. But a lot of the times, right, you're like, okay, like, who's playing? Who's the halftime show? And obviously, hey, like let's look into the commercials. But when you kind of pull the curtain and kind of hear about the process behind it, it's super interesting. And I don't know if you'd be interested kind of diving into that a bit further. But like you're saying, you're someone trying to prove yourself there. How did you end up going about it? Was through it like you said like a net new
it's a good question, right? So I think and this is maybe like goes back to some of the misconceptions around I think the way that a lot of paid media and advertising works is that there is like a pretty established advertising marketplace that exists right there, and there are buyers and sellers. The media companies are sellers, the buyers are typically ad agencies on behalf of brands, sometimes brands directly, but for our purposes here, we'll just say the ad agencies are the ad buyers and the media broadcasters are the sellers. that ad market is fluid and always kind of flowing, right? So people know how much things are worth. Generally, things are priced out on either a CPM, so cost per 1,000 viewers, or CPP, which is a cost per point, cost per rating point, cost per rating a viewer, which a rating is really just a percentage way to express viewership. It's the same as a CPM, really. And so that marketplace exists and is extremely fluid. And at the end of the day, it is, there are buyers and sellers, and it's a supply and demand market that exists out there. So when you're in that sales role trying to, sell sponsorships, some of the sponsorships are, the halftime show and these larger deals. And as someone junior, you're not getting exposure to any of that. There are senior people who negotiate those deals on 12, 24, like 3-5 year basis, right? And you think of, okay, who are the presenting sponsors of big events or sponsors with leagues? Those are multi-year contracts that are really done at the C-suite level. But at the much lower level, where there's junior buyers and junior sales reps who are really your peers, there's a lot of money being transacted just on like an eyeball to eyeball basis. So it's, okay, you've got 1 million viewers for this at a $20 CPM. Do I budget? I've been given, a $750,000 budget for this quarter from, let's say the brand is Sleep Country Canada. Okay, Sleep Country Canada has given us, $350,000 to spend over the next 2 months on television ads. That's what Sleep Country gives the ad agency. The ad agency is going out to buy it, and they're going to go out and solicit pitches from everyone. They're going to call every single, seller that there is out there, all the broadcasters, and say, okay, well, like, here's what I have. What can you offer for me? And the fact of the matter is that they already, the ad agencies kind of already know what is out there, right? Like the ad agency knows the Super Bowl happens every year. They know roughly what a Super Bowl spot costs. So as the person working at the broadcaster, it's a lot of building relationships. It's like, okay, how can I make sure that the media buyer at this agency that I know has these 5 accounts, they have a beer account, they have an automaker, they have a retail or whatever they do. How do I make sure that they spend that extra, 10% of their budget with me? Because if they're never going to take their, huge budget and spend it all with one broadcaster. That would just be negligent, and they'd get fired as an ad agency. But what there is opportunity to do is spend some incremental dollars with one partner over another. And why those incremental dollars get spent is where the like actual audience delivery essentially doesn't matter, right? It's like, hey, I'm gonna deliver the audience equally across these broadcasters. Everyone's gonna get their fair share of budget, but the incremental money is going to go to people who I've built relationships with, or who are going to provide me with some added value, or who I know, to be honest, like if something goes wrong and there's an issue last minute, we have to change creative, we have to pull the spot off air, or we need some extra bonus because as an agency, we messed up this quarter and we're under review from the client. We're worried the client's going to fire us at the end of this year. What can you do to make me as the agency look good? If you're the media broadcaster that can do those things for the buyer, you're going to get that incremental dollar. So that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to essentially go to this agency and say, hey, what are the challenges you're having with your client? What can we do to make you guys look good? I can give you a discounted Super Bowl spot. This client isn't very sophisticated with the Canadian market. They're an American-based client. They're going to see the word Super Bowl and their eyes are going to light up. They're going to say, wow, what a great deal I'm getting the Super Bowl. When in reality, it's maybe like more fair market price for the Canadian market for the Super Bowl, whatever that is. So it was a lot of that kind of building relationship. And that specific case was very much right place at the right time, brand with incremental budget. They needed to spend it somewhere. How do we make sure that they spend it with us?
Yeah. No, that's all super interesting. Like that's all like great to hear. And like definitely I was trying to take notes on all that. It's kind of something you don't get to speak on very often. But then kind of building on that, is that maybe how you kind of moved on to Kingstar? Was it through one of those relationships that you developed?
Yeah, I mean, Kingstar, and that's kind of another point that I think is interesting. I mean, once you got exposure to the media business, and now that I've been in it for some time, you realize that it's not that huge industry in Canada, right? There are only so many broadcast partners, and the media conglomeration has been growing over the last decade, right? So things are getting narrower in terms of how many players there are. There's only so many ad agencies, right? There's roughly 4 global holding companies that own every ad agency in the world for the most part. And you can look up like WPP or Dentsu Aegis, and you can see how many agencies they've bought over the years. I was able to actually go to Kingstar, who's an independent agency, which was really interesting opportunity because they weren't part of these larger holding co networks. But yeah, it was partially relationship driven. It was partially just being around and being exposed to the business and knowing what's going on and being open about your intentions. I'd been at Bell for some time. I was like, hey, I'm looking for an opportunity to do more. What does the outlook look like within the sales department? I would like to do X, Y, and Z. And, some of the senior people at Bell that I chatted with were quite honest and said, hey, if there's an opportunity at an agency, it's really good exposure for you younger in your career. You should go to that agency and get that experience. A lot of people, the broadcaster, have had agency experience in the past and vice versa. So it was kind of recommended to me that, hey, you should look for opportunity within this broadcaster for sure. You should look with other broadcasters as well. You should look at brands direct, or you should look at leagues direct if you're interested in that. But you should also, look for opportunities where you think you're going to get more exposure to different things. And there was just happened to be a new role opening up with Kingstar at the time, and chatted with them, and the next thing you know, I was working there.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and just kind of goes back to, it's almost cliche how everyone says it's all about, like, not what you know, but who you know. But that kind of sees like how it kind of transpires, and you're able to kind of start building your career from that. So from there, like, how long did you spend at Kingstar before you ended up where you are today?
Yeah, so I spent 3 years at Kingstar, which were fantastic, and I really didn't have many intentions to leave. But Playmaker Capital was a really interesting opportunity. And again, with the Bell Media role, I was focused on sports, but I wasn't exclusively working on sports. And with Kingstar Media, I was working with brands who were activating in sports, but we weren't just a sports marketing agency. We were a media buyer. We're a media agency, so we're buying things on entertainment channels and things that have nothing to do with sports as well.
Mm-hmm.
I was probably letting a little bit of my sports bias lean in on some of my recommendations to clients there, to be honest. And Playmaker, we're a startup company. We've been around for only about 18 months now, squarely in the digital sports publishing and sports marketing space. They were hiring their first kind of head of partnerships to lead that brand partnership strategy for Playmaker and all our assets. And meeting with the guys here, it was a fantastic group of people and really interesting opportunity to go, full on into sports, which was always my focus and passion. So after 3 years at Kingstar, I joined Playmaker just a few months ago.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. I was looking into it a bit further before getting to the podcast, but obviously for the people listening, they're not like Googling while they're listening to this. Do you mind maybe sharing, what Playmaker is all about and what kind of things you do there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Playmaker is really that parent company, that holding company. At our core, we're a digital sports media publisher. So I like to refer to us as not dissimilar from the early days of an SB Nation or a Fansided or a Barstool Sports, even maybe without the controversy. But unlike some of those brands that I mentioned, we started off our journey by acquiring a couple of really great digital sports publishers. So we bought a group of sites across Latin America, originally started in Argentina, called Football Sites. That's over 20 different groups of digital sports publishers and sites. And when I say digital sports publishers, I mean both websites, like think of a Bleacher Report website or a Fansided website or SB Nation, and also social handles and video and content and podcasts and YouTube channels that are kind of spinoffs of that. Those kind of platform agnostic sports media companies. So we bought a group of sites called Football Sites. Since then, over the last 18 months, we've acquired 12 different companies. So pretty rapid growth in terms of an acquisition, and have quickly grown to one of the largest digital sports publishers across the Americas. So I think I'd have to check the last quarter or so, but we're about the number 6 largest digital sports publisher across the Americas. So that's across Latin America, the US, and Canada. Right around where Sports Illustrated and Minute Media are. Minute Media owns the Players Tribune and Fansided and a few other digital sports sites like that. In the Canadian market, our big acquisition this year was the Nation Network and dailyfaceoff.com. So listeners of yours that are from Canada, which I imagine is a lot, Daily Faceoff, you're probably familiar with if you're a fantasy hockey player. And Frank Cervelli left TSN to run the content strategy with us at Daily Faceoff. Today, we're the largest fantasy website in Canada, is also one of the largest independent hockey publishers across the Nation Network. We own Oilers Nation, Flames Nation, Canucks Army, Leafs Nation, Blue Jays Nation, HockeyFights.com, Puckpedia, and a number of other kind of brands within the Nation Network and Daily Faceoff. Those are all, what we believe to be the best independent voices in hockey, and also kind of the most entertaining and interesting fan. I don't think anyone says blog anymore. It's very Web 2.0, but really they are fan blogs at the end of the day, where people are in our comments and on our social channels with, Oilers Nation. The playoff run was quite exciting for our Oilers Nation guys and girls, and our podcasts and our YouTube shows.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I know I'm obviously with hockey being in Canada, I'm familiar with a lot of those. But like that's pretty interesting because I think that's where a lot of it's kind of going, where that's really where the community of these sports teams are, right? Like sometimes you see teams trying to create engagement or conversation by doing some bland post, but where the heart and soul of the fans are on sites like that or blogs, whatever you want to call it. So I for sure agree with that, and that's such an interesting space, just kind of like looking into it further.
Yeah, I think listen, like there are certain things that legacy media do really well, but there are a lot of things that they do really poorly, and I think a lot of the fan engagement stuff they do not do a great job of. One of my frustrations working kind of the larger media ecosystem where you're working with traditional media outlets is that they were inflexible and not quick to move, and it felt like they had lost a lot of the fans that were frankly myself. I thought like why is visiting not to pick on any brand, but why is visiting tsn.ca such a kind of poor experience for someone like myself who's a Leaf fan? And why are there, podcasts or shows not accessible across YouTube? Or why am I not able to really engage deeper in the brand? And then you see, people, whether it's from the United States or from other parts of the world, who are doing a great job with that. And it's because they're digital first. They don't have these kind of legacy guardrails. They don't have a TV station to feed or a radio network to feed or a print network like the Globe and Mail or Toronto Star to feed. They're natively digital, and all their content creators and all their voices live on Twitter or live on Instagram or live on TikTok, and they publish to YouTube first, and they make it really easy for fans to kind of get on board with them and provide, for my money, just as good, if not better, quality reporting on the team. There's David Alter, who writes for the Leafs Nation for us, who has worked for pretty much every major sports publication in Canada over his career. The work that he's doing now is no different than the work that he was doing for the National Post or other places. But when he works with us, he is able to immediately publish things to Twitter, publish things to leafnation.com. It's able to get to fans quicker, and it's able to get to them where they are. It's not stuck behind a paywall. Everything that we do is ad supported, so it's easy to get mass reach. And we think that it's not worried about some of the legacy media guardrails that exist. So that really excited me, that opportunity to get in where I think fandom is going. I talk to people who are of our generation, and they are likely to stream a game as opposed to have a cable package. And I like listening to sports radio, but there are a lot of sports radio stations in this country that are being shut down or have already been shut down. So most of my sports content comes from podcasts. And I do love to read the newspaper, but you can't find a print version of the Globe and Mail. They don't even have a sports section anymore. Toronto Star, you'd be hard pressed to find a actually printed copy of the Toronto Star anywhere. So, things like The Athletic are fantastic for that. Things like Daily Face-Off, where Frank Cervelli and Jason Greger and Matt Larkin write for, are fantastic for that. So I think with Playmaker and with Daily Face-Off and the Nation Network, we have a really great outlet for digital first creators, but also it's where fans are. We're not trying to draw people to places that they aren't. Fans are on Twitter, they're on social channels. I mean, I mentioned, and I'm on Twitter a lot, I mentioned kind of the other day is, I did a poll on Twitter during the Leafs playoffs. It's like, what is kind of what does your home tech stack look like during an important playoff game? You have the game on the TV, usually for me with the sound on, and then I usually have my phone where I have my buddies group chat and I have people talking about the game. And then normally I have a laptop or an iPad where I have social media up, and maybe I'm watching a second stream on YouTube of someone else watching the game. Maybe I have Twitter open. I actually almost definitely have Twitter open. There's a pretty good chance I'm waiting for someone to send me a meme or something from Instagram of something that just happened during the halftime show. And I'm no longer just sitting down for the 3 hours of the game and watching whatever legacy broadcast is there. I'm watching the game, but I'm also engaging with the game much more viscerally, in the social world.
Yeah, no, I completely get that. And I definitely see where things are going with that. And to be honest, obviously, different positions, but I was working for a team at one point, and it was very league driven, and everything was very static. Like you had to do everything a certain way, and you couldn't be dynamic, right? Whether it's just like I was in charge of communications, and I was streaming our our press conferences through how I knew how to stream video games because I did an esports tournament, right? So we had the most engaged press conferences. We had fans asking questions on Twitch. But then, some things like that, I was like, what, the best way to kind of engage with fans going forward is through athletes. So that's why I went down that path. So I definitely see that. And as you're kind of touching on all of this, it kind of reminded me of a question I wanted to ask you earlier, but then kind of forgot. You're touching on when you're at Bell, right? You're talking about how a lot of the ad dollars or ad revenue was going towards TV. But then the question I wanted to ask was, over time, and obviously when you were at Bell was a couple of years ago, What's it looking like now? Obviously, you're talking about all these different digital
Yeah.
platforms and how people are now interacting with sports. Has there been like a shift where a lot of it's going towards now podcasts, like these blog
Yeah.
sites? How is this? What's the market looking like in that aspect?
Yeah. So I published some of this stuff on my Twitter, and you can go take a look to get the exact numbers because I'll probably mess some of these up. But radio ad spending in Canada in 2011 was about 1.5 billion dollars. It'll be
Mhm.
below a billion for the last year or two. I don't have updated numbers for the last 12 months or so, but it's well under $1 billion. So it's lost, a half a billion, about a third of its value. Television ad spending, much higher number, but has lost a lot of its value as well. Digital ad spending is up dramatically.
Mhm.
Advertising dollars have shifted to where audiences are, right? What advertisers want are our audience. What they want is reach and they want impressions. But they don't just want anyone, they want a specific set of people. So if I'm an automaker, I most likely am looking for men 25 to 54 as my core demographic and probably skewing a little bit lower than that. If it was really up to me, I'd probably try to get men, 18 to 34. People say, well, men 18, like no 18-year-old has money to buy a car. Well, automakers think in terms of 5 to 10 year cycles, and they want to have a brand relationship with you as a customer so that your first car is a Toyota or your first car is a Honda or Hyundai. And that once you buy that car, you're going to go and have such a great experience at the dealership. You're going to then stay with that automaker and buy a new car or get a new lease from them in 3 or 4 or 5 years and stay, and they have a customer for life. So they're going to invest a lot of ad dollars to reach young people who are impressionable, who are influential. Same with banks and financial institutions. They want to sell you your first credit card. They want to sell you your first mortgage. They want to make sure that they get you at a younger age so that you are a lifetime customer of theirs. Well, where that younger demographic is not in broadcast media. They are not spending a ton of time with linear broadcasts. Yes, they're still watching games, but just about everything else outside the games, they're getting content from elsewhere. The average TV viewer in Canada is well over the age of 50 at this point. So, you got to think if the average is over 50, how am I going to reach people under 55 if there's that much? So all that ad dollars have, obviously Google and Facebook have eaten up a ton of ad revenue, but there's lots of opportunity in the podcast space. I mean, Google and Facebook support a lot of these digital sports blogs as well. So I think from an ad revenue perspective, the trend is just continuing that way, and the numbers have bore that out, both in the Canadian market and globally.
Yeah, no, that for sure makes sense. Where I'm even in meetings sometimes, even with sports teams, right? Where you look at their how they're doing partnerships, and a lot of times it's the classic logo on the field, logo on the boards, etc. And then when you look at their digital assets, they're underperforming. They're just viewed as toss-ins, right? So kind of looking at ways to kind of develop those further. And as you were mentioning, you said that maybe that poll was on Twitter. If I'm not mistaken, your Twitter's AHB Seaborn, so you can check
Yeah,
their
that's
Twitter.
right.
Perfect. And then also, if any car manufacturers are listening, the the audience that Adam referred to is exactly this podcast here. So maybe we have to get our automaker on top of the betting sponsor too. So
Absolutely.
maybe something to see in the future. No, but I love this types of conversation, and obviously this is what makes the route so special because you're always hearing about these different conversations and kind of opening your mind and hearing how different aspects of sports work. And with that, the podcast, I love having these conversations, but I like to kind of end it on two questions specifically. So the first one is, we talked about your route, right? You kind of went from beginning to end. And then the question I like to ask is, let's say you're sitting on a rocking chair, you're 103 years old. That's where I'm going to. I know I'm going to go to 103. And you're looking back on your career in sports so far. What's the one moment? Was it, working on a Super Bowl ad, or was it, joining this new startup Playmaker? What's something so far in your sports career like, wow, I can't believe I got to do that for a living, and you're gonna be remembering that at 103?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that moment hasn't happened yet. I'd say, currently with Playmaker, I'm incredibly optimistic in, the team that we have here, the resources that we have available to really create a sports media company that is global and that has a lot of advantages to legacy media. I think is going to serve fans really well. I mean, people who spend time with our sites, whether it's in Latin America with Bola VIP or Fanaticos, whether it's in the US with Yard Barker or the Canadian market with Daily Face Off and the Nation Network, every single month, more and more people are visiting our sites, visiting our social channels, listening to our podcasts. And the more that happens, the more that we're going to grow and expand as a company. We are really, I think, in just the first inning right now when it comes to this transformation. And I think, the end game for fans is going to be a much better experience. You're going to be able to get the sports content that you want without the same gatekeepers in place. So I'm hopeful that moment hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, no, it completely makes sense. And yeah, I think there's going to be a huge shift coming in the next few years where, I know my parents used to talk about when, the year 2000 was going to come, right? When they were kids, they always used to talk about it and they thought there'd be flying cars. But I think in my lifetime, that's when a lot of things where, they're not just going to be better quality TV, but you're going to find new ways to engage or even kind of get around. So I definitely agree with that aspect.
Yeah, and Chris, I'd say like in some ways, I think we keep saying like that day is coming, that day is coming. I'd say that day is there. Like, MLS just signed a massive deal with Apple TV Plus to be a 10-year exclusive global streaming partner. That means one broadcaster, and by broadcaster, it's really a tech company, has the global rights to MLS. If you're an MLS fan, that is great for you. You now have an opportunity to work with one of the best tech companies in the world. It is going to be easier to watch your MLS games than it was in the past. I promise you that. And I think right now, if you're a sports fan, if you think of people from a generation before ours, and let's say you were into an out-of-market team and you really liked, the Boston Red Sox, even though you're in Toronto, it'd be really difficult for you to get Boston Red Sox talk, right? You're not going to have any of the local papers here cover it. There might be some fan blogs that'll cover it, but in the early days of blogging, nothing really of content. Now, if I'm a Boston Red Sox fan, but I live in Toronto or I live in Halifax, there are, hundreds of podcasts I can listen to. There are dozens of websites. There are ways for me to stream the game, stream the audio of the game, stream video of the game, watch secondary streams of the game. There's a way for me to buy merchandise easily. It's really easy for me to be a fan of my team on my terms. I think we're already there, but what hasn't transitioned entirely is a lot of the legacy business. So we have some of these legacy broadcast deals that are expiring and tech partners are being folded in. I think a lot of leagues are getting more intelligent about how to engage people socially. And I think a lot of brands are getting a lot smarter about, okay, if I'm an automaker, should I really be spending $100 million a year on TV ads? Or should I be going out and sponsoring a few hundred podcasts here and a bunch of social channels and activating with their live events? And that's maybe the best way to reach the audience that I really want.
No, I completely agree with that, right? Where sometimes, like I know even when I was in school and I was, doing coffee chats before I went on podcast form, I'd ask questions like, hey, like, why is your naming rights for your stadium worth $20 million a year? And every time I asked that question, I was asking people from all over the world. No one ever gave me like a formula or an answer. So I was like, oh, so you guys just like throw it out there and whoever's willing. And they're like, yeah, like basically. I was like, that doesn't make sense, right? Eventually people are going to start questioning that. And I think, they now have, right, where they're now looking at things like you're saying maybe 100 podcasts where they can see the metrics and see the bang for your buck. But no, I definitely agree where even like in my lifetime, I'm here in Ottawa. I'm a Senators fan. I remember when I was a kid, I'd be listening to, TSN 1200, listening to the radio, and we'd have maybe like 20 games or however many games on TV if it wasn't on a channel or something like that. It's like some small local broadcaster. So you definitely already see the evolution in the last like 20 years or more, I'd say. So I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, growing up for me, I watched Hockey Night in Canada. I almost never was able to watch, I'm a big Leaf fan. I mean, they were on TV, but I wouldn't often watch the Leafs. I mean, you have to pay for Leafs TV or additional cable package. I wouldn't often watch the Leafs midweek growing up as a kid. I would watch Hockey Night in Canada, and then I would read the Globe and Mail sports section and look at the box score and see what what happened last night around the Atlantic, what's going on with the Gold League, what the rest of our, we have 2 games at hand at Boston. That was the way that I was able to get my Leafs news. And yeah, there was sports radio, but I mean, I was a kid. I wasn't exactly tuned to the radio. Now if I think of someone who was just like me and is a kid growing up now as a sports fan, they have so many ways to engage with their athlete. They can follow them on every social channel. They can watch, YouTube streams of them doing really exciting stuff. Most of these athletes have gone really smart, if they haven't already, about being their own brand and publishing a lot of this stuff themselves, or using platforms like the Players Tribune, or partnering with people like some of our assets to kind of publish themselves and go direct to consumer. So this whole direct to consumer movement is great for fans. Like, as a fan, it is so much better to be a fan of a sports team right now than it was 20 years ago.
No, I completely agree. Like, I'm obviously like living this now, but like I was saying, like I used to watch like the Citizen, going through the box scores, but then eventually I kind of shift to NHL.com, having that as my home screen. But no, I definitely agree with that. And then the last question I like to ask. So we went into the future, 103-year-old Adam, but now looking back to, let's say, 16, 18-year-old Adam, I don't know, time machine from Back to the Future comes, you're in the DeLorean and you get to go speak to yourself. What's something you would say, like when you're, let's say, entering university, you're ending high school, if you could provide a piece of advice to this younger version of yourself, a younger version of myself, or someone listening, what kind of piece of advice you're like, I wish I knew this sooner?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I mean, a little bit what I was saying earlier about being clear about your intentions. I mean, I said that as advice right now, and I did that to some degree, but I was also maybe giving myself advice in the past. There is that listen, like if you want something, it's very unlikely that someone is going to know that you want that thing or know that you're interested in it, and just give you an opportunity for it. So you got to like fight for every opportunity you can find. And the worst thing that someone can say is no, right? So there's no there's nothing wrong with asking. Working in for a number of companies now, when you have someone junior, whether it's like an intern in the summer or someone who's new to the role, never once as I say, wow, that person asks too many questions and is too interested in what's going on. Like apathy is what people really hate. So don't be afraid of coming on too strong or asking too many questions or asking to be involved in things or telling people what you're interested in, because people want to help you. People are willing to take an hour of their time and talk to you on the phone. They're willing to let you sit in on a meeting that you have nothing to contribute to, but at least you can sit there and learn. So be a sponge and don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great piece of advice, because I know when I was, starting off and I was doing some interviews, I remember someone asked me once, hey, like, what do you want to do when you're older? And I said, hey, like, I wanted to, at the time, be a CMO of a sports team. And I told that to either like a professor, family member, whatever. And they're like, why would you say that to someone when you're like interviewing for an internship? I'm like, well, that's the path I want if they find things for me. So no, I definitely agree, because I know that kind of shook me a bit. I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be saying that. But no, that's amazing. And I got 2 pages of notes here, so that's always a good sign. But yeah, Adam, I'd love to having you on the podcast. Unless there's anything else you'd like to add, just thank you so much. And I know people are going to get a lot of value from this.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks a lot, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's episode, what is this, 97 of The Route. Follow us on social media at The Route Sports. You can see here at the top of the corner if you're on YouTube. And that's the end of this week's episode. See you all next week.